Joining me now is Alex Newman. He's got a brand new article out over on his website that is very important because it deals with another attack on parental authority and religious liberty and freedom. Now, this is related to Illinois, folks, but don't go away, because this is also about, well, an attack, I'm sure, coming to you, because a lot of these states oftentimes copy each other. Here it is at the Sentinel, libertysentinel.org. Illinois homeschoolers under attack. It's about a piece of legislation where they now want to subject homeschoolers to basically home visits and a portfolio to make sure that the parents are doing a good job. Now, here's the problem I have, in part. I did a little research today, found this headline right here. 500 sexual misconduct complaints against Chicago public school employees. All right? We've got a real epidemic of teachers molesting and raping students, and it's in the state of Illinois. But they are concerned about conservative, Christian, patriotic homeschool parents. Now, I don't know how many of you heard the case today about the Indiana teacher that is accused of having sex with 5 and maybe as many as 10 teenage boys that are minors in Indiana. I'm going to play a clip. I found in a minute here. I found the clip that's the friendliest one I could find, family friendliest clip I could find, because some of them were a little graphic, but I found one that's a little family friendly. Doesn't go into too many details. But this is in Indiana. And you know what I find ironic about the whole thing? How many of you know of anything about this? The Kinsey Institute. Well, I wrote about Alfred Kinsey, in my book, Grave Influence, that came out in 2009. I'm going to talk about this with Alex Newman a little bit too. But the Kinsey Institute is in Indiana. And they openly state that the Institute had 2 primary goals: to continue the team's research on human sexual behavior and to administer research resources, including research materials, a library, case histories, and other related materials. When you go, by the way, to the Kinsey Institute homepage, kinseyinstitute.org, what do you got? You got 2 chicks embracing each other right there, right? I mean, come on. Exploring sexuality, relationships, and well-being. John Maynard Keynes believed that children should be sexually active by around the age of 6, and that there was really no problem with any sex as long as it was consensual. But adults and children, that was not a problem at all. John Maynard Keynes and his group of, quote, researchers were involved in the sexual molestation of children a few months old to teenage. I have a clip I want to play for you after Alex leaves, from a documentary that one of my friends was involved in producing in the mid-90s called Children of Table 34. You're going to want to see this, all right? Because isn't it ironic that you have the Kinsey Institute in Indiana at the Indiana University, which basically is, saying sex between adults and children is not a problem. That's what Alfred Kinsey taught. And now we have teachers having sex with students. I want to know if there's a connection. And now yet they want to monitor homeschoolers? Let me tell you what this is about. As I said on radio today, this is about getting those kids that they're not brainwashing. They want them under their control. And they also want to make sure these kids can be dragged into the system so they can get the dollars. Because we all know that the public school pensions are collapsing, a lot of them. And they need kids in the seats to get tax dollars. Joining me now is Alex Newman, who's written an article about this homeschool bill in Illinois. Alex, welcome to the broadcast. You want to jump off of what I'm saying here?
Well, thank you very much, Brandon. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you. And yeah, this bill in Illinois is a disaster. Essentially, it will take Illinois from being a relatively free state when it comes to homeschooling. Their state Supreme Court ruled almost 75 years ago that parents had a right to educate their children at home, and that was fine, and that's been fine. But now there's been a few propaganda hit pieces on the homeschool community in Illinois, led by a ProPublica, which is a far-left fake journalism outlet, funded by George Soros, funded by a bunch of extremist billionaires, funded by even Sam Bankman-Fried, the con artist, the crypto fraud guy. So these are the kind of people that are funding this. And they did a big hit piece on Illinois homeschoolers. They found, I guess, one example of a child who'd been homeschooled who also was mistreated by his parents, I guess wasn't allowed to eat enough food or whatever, and got too many spankings. And so then now they're saying now the state needs to monitor and oversee all homeschooling. They want parents who homeschool their children to register like sex offenders with the state. They want the state to be able to come in and demand all your papers and what you're teaching at any time. If you don't comply with this new homeschooling regime, you can be arrested. You can have your children removed from your home. It's absolutely stunning, Brandon. And it's even more stunning when you consider what's going on in the government indoctrination camps masquerading as schools that are operated by the state of Illinois. You've got hundreds of these schools, as I pointed out in my article, where not a single victim, not a single child is proficient in anything: English, writing, math, reading, history, science. You've got less than 1 in 3 victims of these government indoctrination camps that's even proficient in any of those things. And as you pointed out, there is an epidemic of sexual abuse in the government schools like we've never seen before. It's not just Chicago, it's all across the state. In fact, it's nationwide. Back in 2004, the U.S. government did an investigation and found that 1 in 10 children in public schools are being sexually abused, molested, and harassed in government school by a school staff member, a teacher, administrator, whatever. So they are destroying children that they have in the government schools. Now they want to go after the ones that are actually thriving, the ones that are actually learning, the ones that are safe with their families. They can't tolerate it.
No, they can't tolerate. How much of this goes to the issue of money, Alex? They need not just the brainwashing, but they need the money. They need these students. Like 127,000 of them have left the schools of Illinois. I guess are being homeschooled, right? And they need those kids back in there so they can get the government money for each pupil.
That's a huge part of it, Brandon. I'm glad you mentioned the pensions. People don't realize the pension system in Illinois is one of the worst in the whole country. They owe billions of dollars that they don't have. And actually, if you read the ProPublica hit piece that got this whole process started, actually saying there that officials were looking at the numbers and kids are fleeing the public schools, and they had actually referred to it as an exodus. And, of course, they didn't mention this in the article, but for the public school establishment that depends on having victims constantly in the schools, now you've got the border being shut down. They don't have enough victims to justify the salaries, to justify the number of staff. And so they are absolutely freaking out now, frantically trying to figure out how they're going to keep all these people employed, how they're going to keep all these buildings, how they're going to keep all these pension obligations. They're in huge trouble. But I think the really big picture here is that they cannot accept that there's a significant segment of the population that's not being indoctrinated. And I've said this for a long time, Brandon. I think the real concern is that you're going to end up in a situation like in that story with the emperor who had no clothes. All it takes is that one kid that didn't get brainwashed to point out that the emperor is naked, and then suddenly everybody's going to look and say, oh, wow, can we say that? Is he really naked? He really is naked. So they are terrified of having any children escape from this indoctrination regime, and that's why they're after the homeschoolers now.
Now, this bill, summary HB House Bill 2827, I want to tell everybody, it may be in Illinois, but trust me, they're pulling this kind of stunt in other places around the country, so pay attention. The bill would make parents file a homeschool declaration every year with education authorities, this is according to Homeschool Legal Defense, in alignment with the idea that government oversight is necessary to keep children safe and learning. The declaration would call for parents to provide detailed information about their families that would include, among other things, children's names, birth dates, home address, grade level, and catch this, folks, gender identity. They go on to say the bill would permit local school officials to demand review samples of work by homeschool students at any time and for any reason. I said on the radio today, Alex, can you imagine a parent puts something on Facebook that's very conservative, and one of the liberal lunatics in their town who's at the public school can use their power as the local public school to bring that parent in and sit them across from their desk and berate them and grill them and have a power play on them? I mean, there are some good public school teachers, but you and I know and have dealt with a lot of them that are absolutely unhinged. I think it was Marilyn Ferguson who wrote Aquarian Conspiracy about the New Age occult, and she said she was for it, and she said the most popular vocation among New Age occultists was teachers. You and I know a lot of these, particularly some of these white, feminist, Marxist women that are just unhinged, haters when it comes to conservatives, Trump supporters, Christians. And now you're going to give the authority in Illinois for one of these local public school officials to demand to review samples of the work by a homeschool family. How do we know they're not going to use this for their own personal vendetta of someone they see something posting on social media that they know is a homeschool family in their community?
Oh, of course they're going to do that, Brandon. That's what always happens. And you're absolutely right that this is not just an Illinois problem. When you look at the broader attack on homeschooling, this is happening across the country. There's a very well orchestrated plot behind this, and what we're seeing in Illinois is just the tip of the iceberg. I'm glad you brought up some of those points on the bill. There's even more to it as well. The homeschool community is not talking about it much, but the private schools were also looped into this bill, where the private schools were now going to be required to collect a bunch of data for the state and send it in. And this goes into the broader data gathering system that they're creating, where they want a dossier on every child in the country. So we're dealing with several things here. They want to bring homeschooling under control. Now, the lady who's leading this effort, her name is Elizabeth Bartholet. She runs the Child Advocacy Project at Harvard University. Doesn't have any of her own children, but she's going to tell you how to parent yours. And she and her sidekick, James Dwyer at Williams and Mary College in Virginia, they have publicly declared that there's no such thing as parental rights. In fact, Dwyer said the only reason that there's a relationship between a parent and a child is because the state confers that on us through its maternity and paternity laws. And so Elizabeth Bartholet has publicly said, she put out an article in the Arizona Law Review a couple of years ago that said we need a presumptive ban on homeschooling all over the United States. And I watched this happen in Sweden, right? So they're going to try to suck us in by offering us free money. And if that fails, they're just going to try to use outright tyranny to crush us. So this is very, very dangerous. Illinois is ground zero right now for this. But folks, no matter where you are in the country, they absolutely will be coming for you just as soon as they think they can.
And this bill goes on to say HB 2827 in Illinois would empower the State Board of Education to impose more homeschool restrictions and request more data from homeschooling families. Listen now, here's the kicker. All without legislative oversight. All right. For example, state education officials could require homeschooling families to follow public school health immunization regulations and produce records to provide their compliance. In other words, a lot of families get out for multiple reasons, the government schools, or never go. Number one, some of these homeschool moms have done their homework. They don't want their children getting the MMR, measles, mumps, rubella. They don't want the COVID shot. They don't want all this. They don't want their kids possibly dying or being damaged with autism. And they're like, I'm not doing that. So that's one of many reasons. Now they're going to say to the homeschool family, oh, I'm sorry, you now have to get your kids all the vaccines up to schedule with the public school kids. I think there's going to be, if this passes, I think there's going to be a lot of moving trucks in driveways in Illinois, people fleeing Illinois.
Oh, no doubt about it. People are already fleeing Illinois in droves, and this would actually, I think, accelerate the exodus, which is interesting. That's what we saw happen in Sweden, too. When the Swedish government, I was there when this happened, the regime banned homeschooling, and other than the children they kidnapped and forced into the public school, they stole them from their parents, they didn't get any additional victims in their public school system. Almost all the families fled. About half of them fled to Finland. A lot of them went to Norway, to Denmark. Some of them went to France, other parts of Europe, and, of course, some came to Canada. But this is a very real threat. And I reached out because they're arguing now that we got to make sure that these kids that are being homeschooled are getting a proper education, that they're, that they're safe from their parents. And so I reached out to the man who's universally acknowledged as the world's top expert on the homeschool research, right? He's done a whole bunch of the studies himself. He compiles all the peer-reviewed literature that comes out on home education. And I just asked him, what does the data show? Are these kids really at risk with their parents? And, of course, the answer is absolutely not, right? They're safer with their parents than anywhere else because, of course, obviously God designed parents to love their children and have a stake in their upbringing more than anybody else in the world. And then on the academic front as well, the data is overwhelming. It shows very clearly that on average, homeschoolers do massively better than the victims of the government schools. It also shows that more regulation doesn't have any effect whatsoever on academic outcomes of home education. So none of the excuses they're using to bring this in pass muster. When you look at even the secular peer-reviewed literature, the research that's been done on this, so the agenda is very clear. They want to get all the kids into the system. They want to get all of our data. They want to brainwash all the kids. Like you said, they want to make sure everybody's getting all the gazillions of shots that nobody's ever accountable for. And you're right. If this goes through, it's going to make the exodus from Illinois accelerate even faster.
And in your article, you point out that this bill in Illinois would force private schools to register with the state and hand over data of their students. So the private schools are at risk from this thing too.
They are, and thankfully, this may have been where the legislators who are trying to do this screwed up. They have woken a sleeping giant now, because now you've got all the Catholic schools, you've got all the Lutheran schools, you've got all the private schools rising up. The ACSI, the Association of Christian Schools International, all of them are now urging their members, I'll stop this bill. So there is an outcry of opposition. In fact, I understand there's a big protest in Springfield right now, and I think they've tried bills like this several times in the past, and they've always been killed before they could actually get it done. I'm hoping that they're going to end up withdrawing this bill as well. But again, there are very powerful forces that want to see this happen, and I think they see Illinois as low-hanging fruit because it's so thoroughly under the control of the Democrats.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you here your thoughts. We have a report. I'm going to transition over to the schools. I mean, they're worried about these public school kids, how they're being treated. And in fact, I think in your article, you talk about how this ProPublica website was saying that one reason we have to be concerned about the homeschoolers is that there's no real oversight. And yet, no oversight, the attack on homeschoolers continues, means children schooled at home lose the protections that schools provide, including teachers, counselors, coaches, and bus drivers, school personnel legally bound to report suspected child abuse and neglect, end quote. Well, wait a minute. You're worried about homeschoolers being molested or abused, yet we have schools, you show in your article, that have knowingly hid and protected, public schools have, child rapists. True or false?
That's absolutely true. I just did a big expose in Texas, of all places. People don't expect Texas. In Texas, it is legal for a school not to report a teacher accused of raping a child to police. All they have to do is report that teacher to the teacher certification agency. And the teacher certification agency is getting these reports. They've gotten thousands of them. More than 90% of the teachers accused of raping children are being allowed right back into the classroom. They're not being reported to the police for investigation. They're not being reported to prosecutors for prosecution. They're being reported to the credentialing agency, and the credentialing agency is saying, oh, no problem, you're fit for going back into the classroom. Less than 10% are being removed from the classroom after being accused of raping and sexually molesting children. And folks, this is in the state of Texas. I looked up some of the school districts. There's more than 500 of these in the Dallas school district. So, folks, this is a nationwide problem. Your children are not safe in a government school, and now the government wants you to think that they're not safe with you, which is about the most asinine thing I've ever heard.
And now we have a headline at Daily Mail. It's going all over the place. Married teacher asked 3 underage boys, to be involved in sex with her. We're getting reports now. It could be as many as 5 to 10, depending because more people are coming forward. This woman was a teacher, a married teacher, and this is in Indiana. And yet I go over to the Kinsey Institute that is at the University of Indiana. Do you want to comment? I mean, are we shocked that teachers are having sex with students when, number one, we're grooming kids? Not we, they are. Our government is grooming kids, giving kids books that, it's perfectly normal. It's one book, that's what it's called. And I'm on a terrestrial station, TV station. So if I were to show the pictures of that book, like put it into a PowerPoint and show it on TV, I know that in certain states, you could be charged with obscenity. I know other broadcasters on terrestrial television have said that same thing. We can't show those because of the rules regulating terrestrial TV. We could be charged with obscenity. So we can't show you the drawn pictures on terrestrial TV, but they can give it to an 8 to 10-year-old of people involved in sexual activity with each other, including some of it, I think, encourages same-sex things. Now, we have all this going on in school curriculum, and this is what parents were all upset about, partly in the Biden administration, and they started going after the moms who were concerned. Do you find it interesting that we're grooming kids, then the kids give in? Because I don't know when you were growing up, but I graduated from high school in '88. I don't know any of my peers that would have taken up a teacher on the invitation to have sex. They would have been like, are you out of your mind? So clearly the kids have been groomed, I think, many of them, number one. Number two, are we shocked that adults are doing this when we have this idea of Alfred Kinsey, and now you got a teacher in Indiana accused of this with the Kinsey Institute in Indiana? How does a state that I'm assuming gets taxpayer money host the Kinsey Institute, which was complete perversion, and then the same state wants to turn around and prosecute a teacher? Do you see my for doing what Alfred Kinsey proposed and promoted? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, there's no question. And Alfred Kinsey was actually the man who laid the foundation for this explosion of perversion in our society, this explosion of pedophilia. And he did it very deliberately through fraud. Children of Table 34. This is a guy who was training pedophiles to molest children, some as young as a few months old, and recording their responses. And it gets so wild, Brandon. I mean, they were torturing these kids sexually, and then claiming that the kids crying and the kids screaming and the kids passing out meant that they enjoyed it and things like this. And so Alfred Kinsey concluded that children were sexual beings from birth, and so the sexualization needed to start as soon as they could pry these kids loose from their moms. And so now we're seeing this explosion in perversion. And I can't help but think of Romans chapter 1, where people suppress the truth, the knowledge of God. They suppress the truth in their unrighteousness, and then God hands them over eventually to a sexual revolution, a homosexual revolution, and then just a full-blown reprobate mind where we do things like what this teacher is accused of. It's simply horrific. And again, put that all in the context of now they're coming for the homeschoolers, right? I guess the homeschoolers aren't getting enough of this weird sex stuff at home, and so now we've got to regulate and oversee that. It's outrageous. These people all belong in jail.
100%. LibertySentinel.org, LibertySentinel.org. Any closing comment?
Well, I hope people will pay attention to this. I hope people will make the right decision with their children. My latest book, Indoctrinating Our Children to Death, Government Schools' War on Faith, Family, and Freedom, exposes a lot of this. I actually have 2 chapters on the sex ed, the sexualization of children. We deal extensively with Alfred Kinsey, and of course I interviewed Dr. Judith Reisman for that. So that book's also available on my website or on Amazon. It goes into a lot of depth on this, why they're doing it. It's been endorsed by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and General Flynn and Glenn Beck and Roger Stone and all the people who are helping to push back on this wickedness at every level. So I hope people who have children or even grandchildren will seriously think about this, pray about this, get informed about this, and then take action to protect their own children and the children around them, because this is just monstrous and it's got to stop. And thank you for having me on the program, Brandon.
Thank you, Alex. Appreciate you. Alex Newman checking in, LibertySentinel.org, LibertySentinel.org. Alex, by the way, will be one of our keynote speakers at our national conference, our 22nd annual national conference coming up Friday night, October 3rd, Saturday, October 4th, here in the Mid-South. And along with, who else is there, Logan? A gazillion other people. Alex Newman, Dr. Lana, Chris Martenson, Mark Mitchell of Rasmussen, Sidney Powell, Gordon Chang, quite the lineup. Tickets are only $99. We lowered the price because we were able to get a cheaper venue, really nice theater, but it only seats to 350, that's the seats, okay? First come, first go, or first come, first serve, however it goes. Worldviewstore.com, worldviewstore.com. If you want to register, Alex will be one of our speakers, so I hope you will register for that. Now, let me go to this case out of Indiana that's making news today, because I think it is bad fruit from a bad tree. And I'm going to explain something that probably a lot of folks in this audience know, because it's an informed audience. But your average American has no idea that the sex ed curriculum in America is largely based on the perversion of Alfred Kinsey. Here's the book I wrote in 2008, came out in 2009, Grave Influence, 21 Radicals Ruling America from the Grave. You don't need to buy the book. If you're a member of the Vault at worldviewtube.com/vault, this book is in there as a PDF, okay? It's in there, worldviewtube.com/vault. Alfred Kinsey, he wrote Sexuality of the Human Male in 1948, sexuality of the human female in 1953. And as I write, Kinsey's writings were outright sexual propaganda that sought to convince Americans that all sex is outlet sex and equally okay, regardless of whether it's between people of the same sex, the opposite sex, adults with children, or humans with animals. He actually believed it was vital for children to engage in sex by age 6 before they picked up, quote, cultural taboos, end quote, based on, quote, religion, end quote. He did not think people should be classified as homosexual or heterosexual. And one of his specific propaganda goals was to normalize homosexuality, bisexuality, pedophilia, and other sexual perversions. In fact, the extensive research by people such as Dr. Judith Reisman reveals that Kinsey, though married, was a homosexual and a sadomasochist. He kicked off the sexual revolution, and the war on biblical sexuality continues to this day through sex education curricula based on his perversions. Now remember, the Kinsey Institute is at the University of Indiana. Shocker. Now we have a teacher in Indiana who's just purportedly been accused of having sex with teenage boys, a teacher. Now you say, what's the correlation? Well, maybe there is zero correlation. But when you have a state university housing the Kinsey Institute, what do you think that message is? In fact, listen to the cleanest news report I could find on this. The others were just too graphic for me to play. Listen to this.
New tonight.
Well, let me plug in the audio. Here we go.
More teenage students in Morgan County are now coming forward, and they're accusing a former teacher of sexual misconduct with a minor. Ashton Hackman is in Morgan County to explain why the prosecutors are now looking to bring even more charges against this woman.
31-year-old Brittany Fortenberry has been held here at the Morgan County Jail since her arrest last month on charges of sexual misconduct with a minor. Since then, 5 new victims have come forward with additional allegations.
Prosecutors have asked to file up to 24 additional criminal charges against her, including 10 counts of child molesting, sexual misconduct with a minor, and 13 other charges for disseminating material harmful to minors and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Court documents say all of the teens reported Fortenberry would send them nude and explicit photos and videos on Snapchat and force them to have group sex at her Martinsville home. A child victim advocate says it's important for parents to feel comfortable having difficult conversations with their children.
And what we just encourage is that parents kind of ask that open-ended question, and they give their children a chance to speak, and then they praise their courage at that time rather than asking them questions about what they did or why they didn't tell. The last thing that we want is a child to feel blame or shame as a result of making a disclosure.
We reached out to the Morgan County Prosecutor's Office to see when these formal charges will be filed. We have not yet heard back. In Morgan County, Ashton Hackman, 13 News.
All right. So what do you need to know about Alfred Kinsey? Because we have seems to be a pandemic of teachers having sexual relations with students. I've cited one report already that shows the problem of this in just in Illinois alone, the state of Illinois alone, not to mention the national studies. There was a documentary put out in the early 90s, mid 90s. A friend of mine was involved in producing it, and it is called The Children of Table 34. And I want to show you a few minutes of it. This is not for smaller children. I think teenagers can watch it so they can understand why this agenda is being pushed. But I would not think this is for children below 14. But I want to show you a few minutes of this documentary. It's the quality is what you would expect off of VHS tape from the mid-90s, but it'll give you a little understanding about Alfred Kinsey and his worldview, which maybe helps us understand why we have so many kids being groomed, I think, with the curriculum in the schools that makes them susceptible to teachers that are predators. And yet, in Illinois, with the homeschool law that they want to monitor homeschoolers, I think they need to be worrying about their own public school teachers, not the homeschoolers. Watch this.
What would you think if you learned that some of the most important scientific research of the century may have been based on fraud? Or if not fraud, criminal experimentation on children funded by the taxpayer? What if you learned that the results of this research are exerting a profound influence on our society today, ranging from how we deal with sex offenders to how, when, and what our children are being taught about sex, not to mention why. Every parent in America needs to know the facts behind Alfred Kinsey's inclusion of children in his famous sex studies in the late 1940s. Recent revelations about government-sponsored radiation experiments remind us once more of the dangers of projects that violate informed consent and the standards of common decency. As you watch this story unfold, you will learn how America has unknowingly put its children at risk in the name of science. And you may also join me in asking, what happened to Dr. Kinsey's smallest subjects? Where are the children of Table 34?
Children, our most precious gift and our hope for the future. Once upon a time, children were free to roam their neighborhoods without worry. Parents could count on the good intentions of neighbors, school officials, and other adults to keep their children safe. But in recent years, parents have had to take special measures to ensure that their children not come to harm. Their fears are not unfounded. Many children have fallen victim to sexual abuse. How do we go from a safe, caring environment for children to one in which parents are terrified that their children are at risk in just a few short years? Part of the answer may be found in Indiana, at the world-famous Kinsey Institute. In 1948, a zoologist named Alfred C. Kinsey shocked the world with his pioneering study, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male. Although many scientists were critical of Kinsey's methods, the media popularized Kinsey's findings about sex. By 1981, Dr. Judith Reisman uncovered the role of child sexual abuse in the Kinsey studies in a paper presented to the Fifth World Congress of Sexology in Jerusalem. She documented Kinsey's reliance on the systematic molestation of more than 300 infants and children from 2 months old to 15 years of age. Graph tables depicting sexual activity in children use identical criteria as those in the tables on adult subjects.
Then I went back and I took a look at the Kinsey report, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male. And as I reviewed the tables, it struck me as clear as day. How could they get this data? Where would they get these data? How did they know that a 2-month-old baby did or did not have an orgasm? How did they get a record of 26 orgasms in 24 hours for a 4-year-old? A 4-year-old.
If these experiments took place, they involved acts to which no child could provide consent and for which no parent or guardian could provide consent on behalf of the child. Therefore, we're talking about criminal activity, the criminal sexual abuse of children.
Research scientist Gordon Muir sees broad ramifications from Kinsey's work. According to Dr. Muir, who helped edit and publish Judith Reisman's and Ed Eichel's 1990 book, Kinsey, Sex and Fraud,
children as young as 2 months of age are featured in tables. In some cases, 188 children in one table. And the legend beneath the table says, timed with a second hand or stopwatch. The understanding that we have of childhood sexuality and normal childhood sexual development, as it is believed and taught in academia today, comes from the experimental evidence documented in Kinsey's Male report published in 1948 with the child sexuality tables that we have just discussed. It is absolutely astonishing that this is taken as the basis for what we understand to be normal childhood sexual development. And when I try and explain this to colleagues in the type of science that I'm involved in what I call the harder sciences of biology and medicine, statistics, immunology, they frankly do not believe what I'm trying to tell them. And the only way that I can convince them of the truth of this is to go to the library, pull off the shelf one of Alfred Kinsey's books, and show them what in fact is inside. And it is quite shocking.
Based on the Kinsey data, sex researchers formulated a theory of child sexuality that's influenced everything from laws against molestation to how and when sex education is taught. Few professionals would disagree that Dr. Kinsey has been the most influential figure in the study of sex, particularly the concept of child sexuality.
He did not openly promote pedophilia, but he provided the, quote, scientific, unquote, basis for it. He felt the main problem with adult-child sexual relations was hysteria and overreaction on the part of parents and authorities. He believed that young boys needed the help of older people to develop effective sexual techniques. And he recorded that adult sexual contacts with young girls are a source of pleasure to these girls and may lead to better socio-sexual development in their later lives. His co-author, Wardell Pomeroy, a prominent sexologist, has written that the Kinsey research uncovered, quote, many beautiful and mutually satisfying relationships between fathers and daughters. Pomeroy also, in his sex education book, Boys and Sex, refers to the possibility of, quote, loving sexual relationships, unquote, between children and animals.
Children have been increasingly portrayed sexually in major pornographic magazines.
In our study conducted for the U.S. Justice Department, particularly juvenile justice and delinquency prevention, we came up with some pretty surprising findings on the images of children in Playboy, in Penthouse, and Hustler. In particular, Playboy and Penthouse was surprising to us. We were instructed to do the research because of the finding of these kinds of materials being used in sexual activities, sexual crimes, really, against children. Most disturbing was that 29% of the visuals, that is, the photographs, included some sort of nude or genital display. Very, very surprising. 21% were visually exposed and sexualized. 20% had some sort of genital activity taking place of some type. 10% involved force, 10% killing or murder.
Before Kinsey, psychologists had rejected the idea of children as sexually viable until the age of puberty. Earlier this century, Sigmund Freud paved the way for Kinsey by asserting that children were sexual, but that their sexuality was latent, that is, not acted upon until puberty. Kinsey's report radically altered this perception, spawning an entire industry based on the notion that children have a right to sexual relations at any age.
And we'll just stop it there, because that's about all one can stomach, if that much, right? Now, this documentary put out in the mid-90s, and I was aware of it when it was being produced. One of my friends was involved in producing it. It didn't get a lot of play. There were some family groups that I was told at the time were afraid of this topic. And yet, I don't know what there's to be afraid of. It's pretty well documented. I went on in my book, Grave Influence, as I said, it came out in 2009, to do a whole chapter on Alfred Kinsey. Here it is. Here he was on the cover of Time magazine. And I write, Alfred Kinsey earned his PhD from Harvard University in the study of insects and became a world-class expert on the gall wasp. So perhaps it's no surprise that his later research on human sexuality was little more than a sting operation designed to hoodwink and titillate gullible people into believing their fantasies. Kinsey, who was strongly committed to Darwinian evolution, released his most famous book, Sexual Behavior on the Human Male, in 1948, Sexual Behavior in the Human Female, 1953. Far from being scientific, I write, Kinsey, his writings were outright sexual propaganda that sought to convince Americans that all sex was equal, outlet sex. His so-called research included collecting data from adult men who had raped and molested as many as 300 children, ranging in age from 2 months to 15 years. Kinsey personally watched and kept detailed notes. Kinsey believed it was vital for children to engage in sex by age 6 before they picked up cultural taboos influenced by religion. Kinsey did not think people should be classified, as I said earlier, as homosexual or heterosexual, and he himself was bisexual, homosexual as well. In fact, again, we talked about Judith Reisman, you just heard from her yourself. Kinsey believed that as long as a child gave consent, it was completely normal and healthy for adults to engage in sexual activity with children. In fact, as we saw in that video, Kinsey kicked off the sexual revolution. It has become the basis of much of our sex ed curriculum in America today. And as I said, he did not believe that people should be classified as homosexual or heterosexual. So I'm going backwards now, so let me skip a little forward. In fact, by the way, you'll find that entire video, Children of Table 34, just type that in. The Children of Table 34. You'll find it on YouTube if you can stomach watching the whole thing. Look at this. In 2002, the University of Minnesota Press published Harmful to Minors, The Peril of Protecting Children from Sex by Judith Levine. In her book, Levine declares, quote, sex is not harmful to children. It is a vehicle to self-knowledge, love, healing, creativity, adventure, and intense feelings of aliveness. There are many ways even the smallest children can partake of it. Of course, that's end quote. The Kinsey Institute went on to help create what's known as SIECUS. This is the Sex Information Education Council in the United States. That was in 1964. Dr. Mary Holdren, who was a medical director for Planned Parenthood, became the first SIECUS president. Wardell Pomeroy, who was Kinsey's co-author on both books, served on the founding board. With SIECUS under their control, their direction, the Kinsey ideology began pouring into the sex education programs promoted by Planned Parenthood. In addition to the influencing of educational curriculum, Kinsey personally worked to reduce penalties for sex offenders. With Columbia University law professor Herbert Welcher, he promoted the American Law Institute's Model Penal Code. That was in 1955. And most states cite the code, which is largely based on Kinsey's findings, as the blueprint to ease penalties for sex offenses, resulting in less protection for women, children from sexual predators. A quarter to nearly half of Kinsey's so-called suspects were prisoners, folks. Okay? So they're not representative of the average person in American population. He took prisoners and used them as his subjects. Over 1,400 of his subjects were sex offenders. You see how skewed this so-called research was? His subjects were overwhelmingly single men, when less than a third of the population was single during the 1950s, and they were also predominantly college educated. He classified prostitutes and cohabitating females as married. See how flawed his so-called research was, folks? Women and then married women, and then claimed that 26% of married women committed adultery. Of course, his deceptive definition of marriage was buried in the details of the lengthy book and didn't end up in popular versions of the research. So when this book came out, his original book came out, Sexuality of the Human Male in 1948, Sexuality of the Human Female in 1958, 48 was the Sexuality of the Human Male, 53, Sexuality of the Human Female. People were like, wow, I guess Americans are a lot more immoral or sexually active in areas that we didn't think. Well, it was all based on fraudulent research that sought to normalize these things. And yet, this is the basis for much of our sex ed curriculum. So I go back to the question I was asking earlier. And folks, there's so much about Kinsey I'm leaving out because it's just too tough to hear about, and I really don't want to talk about it. But you can go do your own homework. I have some of this, again, a whole chapter on Kinsey, my book, Grave Influence, which you don't have to even go buy the book. It's part of your membership when you join our vault at worldviewtube.com/vault. So I go back to asking the question, how can the state of Indiana be so outraged over what that teacher did in Indiana when the last time I checked, and I went there today, the University of Indiana is still hosting the Kinsey Institute right here. Okay, there's their home page. Go spend a little time where they tell you all about their history. In fact, you just go up here to the About page and they tell you it's all based on Alfred Kinsey and his so-called research team. So, you wonder why we have a problem today with children being raped and molested by their own teachers? Many of them, I believe, have been groomed to take part, if even under duress and pressure. They've been, I think, in many cases, conditioned to think this is normal. Again, go look at some of the sex ed curriculum being taught to children as young as 8 years old or lower. And why do we have so many teachers involved in this, particularly the women? Clearly, some of these women have serious serious spiritual and psychological problems, number one, clearly. But some of them clearly have their own problems with pornography. I don't know. This is the part of the story, the storyline, the news stories that confuse me the most is the women that get involved in these activities. But hardly a week goes by that I don't see a news story of a female teacher molesting, having sex with male students or even female students. But then again, the Alfred Kinsey ideology has been around for enough generations that many of these adults who are now teachers would have been taught the worldview of Alfred Kinsey. So maybe even their behavior is based on the fact, in some ways, they were groomed to carry out this behavior as adults on children who I think, I'm sad to say, are being groomed to think that somehow this is acceptable. When at their very conscience level, they know it's not. They know it's not. But then again, we're telling them that this is all okay. I could show you the sex ed curriculum. I've been writing about it forever. I showed you what was being published by the University of, I think that was University of Minnesota Press in 2002. I just gave you the slide on it. A lot of people are not talking about this because they don't have a basis on which to make any sense of it, right? If I had not researched Alfred Kinsey, as I have done since the mid-90s, I would have no basis for really understanding this either. They'd be like, what is this all about? Why is this happening? This is a growing problem. Obviously, we have more pornography. It's more accessible. But there's something deeper going on here. And until you understand the worldview of Alfred Kinsey and how he is literally ruling the world and America from the grave in the area of the sexual revolution, you won't fully understand what's happening. So I found it interesting today that one of the big news stories was this teacher in Indiana. And I thought, well, let's not forget you have the Kinsey Institute at the University of Indiana. And then I tied that to the story about Illinois. They're more worried about monitoring homeschoolers when we clearly have an epidemic of government teachers molesting and raping students. Again, analysis you're not going to get just anywhere. Please consider going to worldviewtube.com/sponsors, will you? worldviewtube.com/sponsors. I have my I drink my green drink pretty much every day. Melissa normally brings it to me to the desk, but Dolly gets a half a scoop on her food. We had Dr. Lana on about that last night. It's an amazing segment we did with Dr. Lana last night that you can go back and watch at worldviewtube.com. Then, of course, you know about Bella Grace. I take it each and every day, loaded with collagen, cat's claw, that's an anti-inflammatory, astaxanthin, that crosses the brain-blood barrier, loaded with antioxidants, excellent for your gut health. Don't forget about Worldview Water. Get your water filter. I have one under my kitchen sink. It's the water I drink, my whole family drinks. It's the water Dolly drinks. It removes all kinds of toxins. A lot of chemicals that frankly cause cancer. That's one thing I do not want. How many of you don't want that, right? Well, a lot of it's in our environment. It's in our food. And so we need to be careful what we're drinking. Certainly we need to be careful what we're eating. And then I think we need to take things that are loaded with antioxidants, whether it's Bella Grace or your Gatatana. Then, of course, don't forget about your Numi. You can swish with the Numi, and that contains glutathione, which detoxes your cells. There are over 162,000 studies at PubMed on glutathione. So again, Melissa and I swish with this every day. She got as I mentioned last night, she got a sinus infection. She's prone to those. And usually when she gets them, she has to get on antibiotic. This time she started swishing about 10 times a day, she said, with glutathione, with the Numi. And she was able to knock out her sinus infection without getting an antibiotic this time. So again, this helps to detox your cells. Some studies show glutathione may remove mercury from your brain, helping prevent Alzheimer's, dementia, and Parkinson's. Perkinson's. I think that's when you have too much French silk at Perkinson's. That's something I don't mind having, Perkinson's. Logan, do you know what? Are you suffering from Perkinson's? Logan doesn't even know what French silk pie is, do you, Logan? Yeah, chocolate pie with the white icing and everything, yeah. Anyway, squish for life if you don't want to get the Parkinson's. All right, there you go. All right, go over to worldviewtube.com/sponsors. Also, you can check out worldviewtalk.com. Get your satellite phone. It's free when you sign up for one of their very reasonable monthly plans. They got bulletproof backpacks. They have the solar generators. I have the Delta Echo 400. With all that's going on in the world, folks, you definitely do not want to stop your prepping plans or begin. Don't delay beginning your prepping plans if you haven't. I am constantly adding to my prepping plans and updating inventory and rotating it because I know it doesn't matter who's in office. I mean, it does matter, but it doesn't matter. These people are still going to carry out terrorist attacks. They may even be more prone to try and incite World War III with Donald Trump in office. So just because the White House is now, the home of Donald Trump, which I'm happy about, doesn't mean we're any less headed toward World War III. It may even have escalated in certain areas. So don't stop your prepping plans. Now, if you want to get one of those solar generators, I would suggest you probably make a phone call because you're going to have a lot of questions. 1-866-738-3224, 1-866-738-3224. Let's see, what else? I guess we got pretty well everybody in there. Oh, the worldviewhealthcare.com. Worldviewhealthcare.com, which is also worldviewtube.com/sponsors. You want to do a lower third for that? Because guess what, folks? You want to make sure you have all your meds on hand. Should there be a disruption in the critical infrastructure, you want to make sure you have your ivermectin, your amoxicillin, your antibiotics. Like when I got pneumonia last year, I didn't have to go to urgent care and sit. I felt too sick to do that anyway. I was so sick. I can't even imagine having to go up there and sit. But I didn't have to because I had the wellness company plan, their kit. And Melissa just walked down the hall, opened the closet, pulled out a wellness emergency kit, put me on amoxicillin. So make sure you have plenty of these things on hand. Okay. You can also check out their health plans that include the enhanced. You get free prescriptions. The ultimate, you get free prescriptions and free supplements. So check that out. Worldviewhealthcare.com. Worldviewhealthcare.com. These are just some of our sponsors, folks, that help us do our long format interviews and help us keep this all going. So please tell your family and friends about this page as well. Worldviewtube.com/sponsors. Worldviewtube.com/sponsors.